Yes, doctor.
Good evening once more.
Good evening, doctor.
The last time we met, we were looking at communication, and we're just going to start on some activities, some communication activities, which would lead then to your forum discussion that I had put up. I don't know if you've seen it as of yet, if you've gone to Moodle and seen it.
Doctor, for me, I've not accessed the Moodle.
Dominic, you've not yet accessed?
No.
Did you try contacting? Yes, please. Did you
it needs me, I think, to get the. Pardon?
Did you try contacting David?
No, I didn't.
Remember, I remember I'd given you David's contact details.
Yes.
David, it's okay.
Yes, please.
Hello, Doctor.
Yes, Edwin.
Sorry, I had called one of our colleagues to join us that you have started, so I didn't get the communication well. Sorry, Doctor.
No, I was asking if you had all seen the discussion forum on Moodle that I posted up on Moodle.
Doctor, apart from the other recording you sent, I had not yet checked to see the discussion forum.
Let me share my screen.
Yes.
This is the discussion forum. If we can just go to the program itself, it's under the topic communication, where you have the lecture slides. Then I had put up designing classroom technologies. So, and actually the cutoff date has happened. I'll need to extend it. So because this one is graded, this discussion forum is graded. But I'm going to extend it after this lecture. But it's asking us to look at we are going to discuss in this class communication strategies in a normal classroom setting. Yes. But if we were now to translate that using classroom technologies, how would we do that? So I'd wanted us to look at it. But before I go further, before we continue where we had stopped, these lecture slides are also on Moodle. We had looked at challenges to communicating across cultures, and we're going to look at communicative activities, just certain activities that can help us improve communication in a classroom. Communication in a classroom is quite different from any other kind of communication, because it's extremely necessary that a facilitator, a teacher drives the point home, and the student also gives appropriate feedback that the lecturer knows whether an objective is being met. So I wanted us to start on that, but before we do, I wanted us to maybe if you had any thoughts after our last lecture, if you had any thoughts about what we had discussed, especially about communication. Do we have any questions?
Doctor.
Yes, please.
I went to the Moodle and I wanted to drop some discussion.
Yes.
But it couldn't allow. They said it was overtied, somehow expired. There was some comment there.
Yes. I'm going to extend the time. I'm going to extend the time, but I urge all of you please go to it. I'll extend it up to today's Friday. I'll extend it up to Monday. So Monday night, so that you
Okay,
have
fine.
today, tomorrow, all the way up to Monday, to make a contribution
Okay.
there. Mm.
Hello, doctor.
Yes, please.
Mine is some a question. For me, I use the e-learning platform, UMU e-learning platform. Then I accessed it. Is it different? Is that different from Moodle?
Okay. Now, let me just explain. Moodle is an e-learning system that UMU set up to support teaching and learning. For you to access it online, what ICT did was set up a domain. And this domain is elearning.umu.ac.ug. So I'm just going to log out of this and take you through it. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go either, you can either, to access Moodle, you start by accessing this domain that I'm highlighting. If you can see my screen, it says elearning.umu.ac.ug. That is the domain that gives you access to Moodle, UMU's e-learning platform. Now, you can access it directly by typing in this domain, elearning.umu.ac.ug, or you can start by going to the UMU website, which is umu.ac.ug. Yeah, if you go to this site, it's opening up now. If you don't want to go directly, if maybe directly you may not remember the URL, elearning.umu.ac.ug. You go to the UMU website, umu.ac.ug. Look for the tab Academics. I'm highlighting it here, where the cursor is moving, Academics. Under Academics, go to the link e-learning and click on it. Once you click on it, you come to the very page which we had started with here, elearning.umu.ac.ug. It's the same thing here, elearning.umu.ac.ug. So Edwin, this is the Moodle site. Essentially, this is the Moodle site. Now, for you to log in, you click on the button which says login here. Click on the login button. Now, all students, as the site says, all students log in with Zivaste on the left panel here. But I know that Edwin has been using the manual way, which like for myself, I type in my email address and then my password. However, for all students are supposed to actually log in using in the login with Zivaste. The reason they do this is to check if you have paid, if you have paid the fees the fees that you're required to pay. Once you use the Zivaste link, then you use the login credentials you use whenever you're logging into Zivaste. I remember the last time we had talked about this. I don't know if you know what I mean. You understand what I mean when I say log in using your Zivaste credentials. Can you hear me?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, Dominic,
Yes.
do you understand when I say log in using your Zivaste credentials?
Yes, doctor, I understand, only that you know those credentials I think you got from the IDs.
Okay.
I think that code is on the ID, but I haven't got mine. I think that is where the problem is.
Okay. Now, maybe what you need to, if you contact David Musoke
Yes.
or Emmanuel Kasozi, they will help you get those
Yes.
details.
Okay.
Yes.
It's okay.
Yes, they should be able to help you, guide you at least to somebody who will help you.
What if I go to Rubaga?
Rubaga, yes, you can go there. You can go there. You can also call either Emma or David. If you call them rather than going all that far, you can call them and they'll help you.
All right.
Yes.
It's okay.
Okay, let me.
All right. Thank you, doctor.
Let me write in the chat room their contact details, both their email addresses and their phone numbers. Give me a minute.
It's okay.
Just give me a minute. So for David Musoke, his email is dmusoke@umu.ac.ug, and his phone number is 075. Hold on. 0757 414650. 0757 414650. Then Emmanuel Kasozi, Emma Kasozi is ekasozi@umu.ac.ug, and his phone numbers 0705 408478, and the other one is 0772 615032. So those are their contacts, and those two can help you. Okay. Okay. So that is how we would access Moodle. Essentially, that is how we would access. So for me, I can, even all of you can access the same way Edwin has accessed. It's just that the university would prefer that you use the login with Zvarsity for the sake of checking. Sorry about this error. For the sake of checking, but that is of checking of fees payment. So yeah. So let me. So for all of you, I think it was David who said that there is this discussion forum here under communication in the classroom. And the time has expired, but I'm going to extend the time so that you can make a contribution to this discussion forum. Okay. Should we move on with the lecture?
Yes, doctor.
Yes,
doctor.
Okay. So we had looked, essentially, we had looked at communication in our previous session. We looked at what communication is, the elements of communication, and basically characteristics of a good communicator, and barriers to communication. And especially we also looked at cultural barriers that may exist. Now, however, in a classroom, we must endeavor to carry out really good communication and to ensure that we achieve our objective. Now, the next couple of slides, we are going to discuss strategies to good communication. strategies that we can implement in classrooms to ensure that we drive that, or that to ensure that teaching and learning actually does take place. So what exactly are we talking about? We are trying to see how we can encourage learners and students to speak up, to come up and speak. For anyone who is teaching, you know how difficult it may be to just get somebody to talk in a class. This can be quite a challenge. I especially see it in my undergraduate classes when I'm trying to teach an undergraduate class, how difficult it may be to get people to communicate. And all the more, the bigger the class, the bigger the challenge to get everyone to communicate, everybody to chip in and give feedback, whether they have understood something or not. And as we are now getting the new experience of teaching online, I think this becomes even more another challenge, because you're actually not seeing people, you're not looking at somebody face to face. Somebody may be doing something else as you talk. Somebody may decide to walk away, and they appear as if they are part of the class, but they're actually not part of the class. So trying to get people to talk first and foremost, then to listen is another. So those 2 points really become a challenge. Secondly, we want to ensure that the class is not teacher-centered, that the classroom is not teacher-centered, that a session is not teacher-centered. So we want to devise strategies where we get students to actively participate in a classroom discussion, where everybody's thoughts are brought out, where everybody's feelings about something are brought out. Remember, if we go back to the definition of teaching or education, you see that, or communication, you see that we're trying to persuade somebody to come over to our side. Whether you are a student or you are the teacher, you're trying to persuade somebody to come over to your side. For that to happen, there must be the communication cycle must be complete. So we have different kinds of classroom communication. We have different kinds of classroom communication. The first one is lecture, which is, for example, what I've given you now. And this can really end up one-sided if one doesn't devise means of getting feedback. Take an example. In one of our lectures, I used Padlet. So Padlet, something like that, especially if you have online communication, it is to ensure that you've kept the attention of your class. Now, if it's a physical classroom, you can also devise ways that you start something, you give your teaching, and then require that at a certain point, the students, each of your class students must give feedback in one way or the other. And you can use the question and answer session, or where you the lecturer, you ask questions, or maybe give a quiz or whatever it is. But even if it's a physical classroom, you can also devise certain means. For example, some people can decide, okay, let me allow, if I have a certain group of students who are able to have certain gadgets, then you say, let me allow that, let's say we use WhatsApp, where I ask every student to post something in a WhatsApp group. Knowing how students really love these technologies, you can, especially they love texting, you can allow something like that in your classroom if the need arises. Then we have group work. So here we have several strategies that I'm going to give you in the slides that will come later. Group work really is one communication strategy that forces students, or rather puts students in a position where they must bring forward their thoughts. And it takes attention away from the teacher themselves. So group work is an extremely effective strategy for encouraging student participation. It can be a challenge when you have big groups of students, and it also may not be a good strategy if you are introducing a topic or an area that is completely alien to students in general. This may not be a good idea. And for sure, when we think of the lecture presentation, a lot of times it is downplayed. There may be some feeling that, or maybe the lecture style of communication really is teacher-centered. Yes, it is teacher-centered, but there are certain topics, there are certain areas of discussion which may not allow for group discussion, where really somebody is an expert in an area and this person must be allowed to speak. So take an example. So give me a minute, please. Give me a minute. Apologies. I'm in a big household and they are not used to me being here teaching. The third is interpersonal. So we have seen this interpersonal communication previously, but this is just to emphasize some strategies which we're going to discuss later on. So interpersonal is where you have two people communicating. So here you're expecting that you're discussing something that is familiar to both parties as you're carrying out interpersonal communication. Then the last is intercultural. So intercultural, this may seem strange because most of the time when we think of intercultural, like myself, when I think of intercultural, I think of somebody who is not Ugandan, somebody who is probably of a different race from me, and so on and so forth. But this is not necessarily always the case. Whereas in Uganda, we may have, yes, number one, we are from different tribes. And for sure, people who come from different tribes definitely will have certain communication differences. For example, I think it was Edwin who gave an example of that. He was in a workshop where somebody was using a certain word. I can't remember the word, but the word was, the pronunciation was affected by the person's origin of tribe. That in itself is it calls for interpersonal, intercultural communication, where we rethink about what we are going to say based on where we come from. The other one can also be in terms of generations. What do I mean? When my nieces and nephews are speaking to me, I know they have to change their language because what they discuss amongst themselves is not the way the terms and verbs and words they use amongst their peers are not the same that they would use with me. Likewise, also when you're teaching, sometimes to bring the person into your understanding, you as a teacher, you may have to come into their world and understand the way the younger generation communicates. Sometimes, especially if you'd like to gain their attention, pick their interest, whatever it may be. Now, I'll give you an example. Technology is something that fascinates the youth, the younger generation. It really fascinates them. So for them, for instance, to bring in use of technology, it is extremely helpful. Apologies. So some effective strategies that we may use. Number one, especially when we are in a lecture scenario, what strategies can we employ? Number one, the tone of voice we use. Now, this may seem quite simple, but you may find there are certain people who naturally don't have a pleasant tone. That may be a bit hard to improve, but there are certain people who really work on something like that, where they say, let me focus on how I speak and the way I speak, and we can actually change the way we speak. I'll give you an example. When you're talking to a really young child, your tone of voice has to change. If you let's say, for example, you see someone trying to communicate to a baby, the tone of voice really changes. When you're speaking to somebody who is really your superior at your workplace, or maybe a religious figure, your tone of voice automatically changes. So also in a classroom, it is important that we consider the tone of voice that we use. Vary your speed. Think of those things where you have to take your time to communicate, especially when you're communicating something that is complex. I'll give an example. I listen a lot. I really take an interest in religion, and for myself, because I want to understand my faith, I like to listen a lot to those theologians, should I say, those people who want to communicate, let's say, the teaching, the philosophy or the theology behind certain teachings in my particular faith. And to listen to those, when you listen to those, especially when they are teaching something complex, normally it's done using lecture, but you see the way an effective theologian really takes time on certain theological concepts, because they want you to grasp something. The way they will slow down on something that is particularly complex, that we can't, and that a lay person like myself wouldn't understand automatically. So they really take time and slow down their pace. Another example I can give you is, I remember a particular teacher I had in my O-level, during my time in O-level. He was the physics teacher. Now, this particular teacher, this is now just my personal opinion, but to me, he was one of those teachers that I particularly, I think, enjoyed, and I think he was one of those teachers that I appreciated. I was in a school that really focused on corporal punishment. If you didn't understand something, for example, if you got below 50 in math, you received a certain amount of gains. If you got this amount of points, you got that. You know, that style. If you didn't pass a certain number of marks, you got your canes. And then there were other teachers who just didn't care. They came in as technocrats. They came to teach. Let's say you're teaching chemistry, you've come to teach your subject, and if the student didn't get it, they just didn't bother with you. But this particular teacher, I remember when he taught us physics, he really took his time. And if he focused and he saw that you were distracted at any point, he would call you out by name and then tell you, oh, please take time, please pay attention. Please give me a minute. sorry about that. So that he would vary his speed. I remember particularly because when he wanted a particular point, you to drive a particular point home, or if he saw you distracted, he would call you out and politely remind you that this is an important point that you had to grasp. For me, I think he was one of those teachers who demonstrated this some of these effective means of communication. Using messages, the I messages rather than you. This is a key point. This was him bringing his himself, or rather, even you as a teacher, if you use the I message rather than you, you're making it personal. When you're bringing the very heart of you, the teacher, into the class, and you bring yourself into the class. We say, if it was me, I would do this. If it things like that, or bringing your very experience into the classroom. Using the person's name, I had just given that example for my teacher in particular. Then using appropriate non-verbal cues. Now, when we are talking, more than just our words come in. I may be speaking here, but I may change the tone of my voice so that you may understand the significance of something that I'm trying to say. If you could see me as well, you'd also see my hand gestures, my facial expression, to bring forward a key point. And this grasps, it takes up it can take up somebody's interest in case somebody is getting distracted. Now, here I want to bring in my experience. I remember, I think I told you that in one of my teaching experiences, I taught a class where I had a blind student. And one of the key things that I learned, one of the key things that I picked up from that experience is that for us who can see, these eyes that we have are very destructive, really very destructive. As somebody is teaching, you may look outside the class window, you may see somebody passing, birds may be singing outside, somebody may be passing, may be sweeping the compound or slashing the compound, and all of this can be really distracting rather to somebody in a class. However, those non-verbal cues for your students that can see, those can be very, very helpful. They can be very helpful in bringing a student's attention back. Then ask meaningful questions along the way, especially if you're teaching several points. Stop along the way and ask meaningful questions, just to ensure that you still have the attention of your class. Choose appropriate time for communicating. Now, this also comes with the meaningful questions, where you divide your class, your teaching, your lecture into sections where you say, after this point, I'm going to ask questions so that I can keep the attention of my class. Do we have any questions before we go to interacting with students, or any thoughts so far?
Yes, doctor. To me, I think we are together.
Okay. Now, let me just continue then with some strategies as you're interacting with your students. The first strategy I would say is treat all equally. Sometimes when you're teaching, they are automatically different. People have different characters. There are people who have a pleasant character, and they are very easy to communicate with, and this you may naturally gravitate towards them to ask these people questions. There are some who are very active, and they really want to to raise their voice and be heard. And then there are those who are, there are those who maybe are not interested. There are others who may be shy. And they are all, you have all different types of characters. And I mean, you can see it in any social context. But it is important that you try to treat every student equally. It is important that you try to, you make sure that throughout your class, you ask somebody to make a contribution. Of course, it becomes extremely difficult, especially when we have our big classrooms. However, this is something that I noticed, that with technology, you can actually get everyone to contribute. If we only just open up our eyes to use all technologies that we have available. Now, when we get to technologies that we have on hand, and I believe by next week we should have started with some of these technologies, both audio, visual, and otherwise. I will try to bring forward to you technologies that are freely available that you can use in whatever context area that you may be. Just technologies that you can use, that you can get everyone to interact with. Whether you have been using a lecture style of teaching or discussion forum or interpersonal, whatever it is, there are technologies that are freely available to us. And they may not cost your school, the school that much, but they may cost the individual something to use, especially in terms of connectivity. But these technologies exist. To acknowledge what somebody is saying. It is when we are communicating, and especially this exists for us in Africa. The first point 2 and 3, acknowledge and positive feedback every day. These two are things that in Africa sometimes we tend to be quite, should I say, we are misers with this kind of thing. What do I mean? When somebody gives any kind of response, maybe to your question, it is important you acknowledge that person's contribution. Whether it may be it may not be what you were expecting, whether it's just not up to par, but acknowledge it. Why? Because this becomes a point of encouragement. And it also becomes a point on which you can build to get even more from that person. Now, for me, where am I coming from with this? When I speak about us, particularly in Africa. For me, when I did my PhD research in the Netherlands, and one of the key things, I remember one of the key things my supervisor was particularly frustrated about with me was my lack of communication. And what do I mean? It was very common for me to, when you'd give me a task, let's say, go and do your chapter this, and then I'm stuck somewhere and I bury myself. And I say, I have failed to do this. If I say anything, I'm going to display how ignorant I am, or how daft I may be as far as research is concerned. And it became very frustrating for my supervisor, where he kept trying to get something from me. And then until eventually I realized, as time went on, I realized that the more I gave him information, and when he asked me questions, I realized his questions were not demeaning in any way, but rather they were questions to make me stop and think about what I was writing. And once I got that into my head, that he wasn't criticizing me for the sake of it, but he was actually trying to encourage me to think more about what I was trying to bring forward, I opened up. Now, later on, actually, I remember when I was even going to present my work, my final defense, I was really scared. But one of the things that I realized, especially in the Netherlands, was that for you to fail at your final defense, you would only fail if you simply didn't say anything. period. That was down and up, down and up to the point. For you to fail, it meant that you simply failed to talk. Whereas now here, let me compare that to PhD defenses in Uganda, particularly I would say at Makerere University. Somebody said that at a PhD defense at Makerere University, it's almost as if you're in a firing squad, where whoever is questioning you almost wants to bring you down. Whereas in the Netherlands, when I went to do my defense, even the chair of the defense committee would shut down a professor who was being particularly difficult. So in other words, they focused on positive feedback. That's what they focused on. Even when my supervisor, I remember when he kept taking me through my chapters, everything he was getting me to do was to ensure that I could defend my work. I could defend why I picked a certain research method, why I picked a certain research approach, why I picked a certain theory, that I could defend it, why I selected it above anything else. That even if somebody tried to bring forward a new theory, I would say, okay, it's fine that you wanted that theory, but for my particular research, I deemed this as being the most appropriate. And I could defend my work clearly. And that if anyone tried to be difficult, that person could be shut down. That was somebody who, first of all, acknowledged what I gave him. Secondly, gave me positive feedback every day. That positive feedback was in terms of critical questions, not unnecessary criticism or criticism that was meant to put you down, but criticism that was meant to for me to think further. So this is a key point for positive feedback, to get our students to think about what they're bringing forward. Even when somebody brings forward an answer, make sure that you maybe try to understand why they gave you an answer that maybe is not possibly in line with what you're thinking as a teacher or as a lecturer. And try to understand why they are bringing that point of view, and not what you are hoping, what you are expecting. Student first, not disability. This comes with student feedback and acknowledging, to understand the student's point of view first, why they should bring forward a certain answer, not the other. Address student directly and encourage rather than correct. Those go back to the positive feedback. Do we have anything to add on so far? Should we move forward?
Yes, Doctor.
Okay. Sorry. Another strategy is turn and talk. So now, here you are especially, this is when you are especially want to encourage interpersonal communication. Each student picks something in a different way. Each student will have a different perspective. So, and encouraging that interpersonal communication enables students to exchange their perspectives on different things, on a task which may have been given to them, but each may have picked a different point of view. And this different point of view builds up on what each person understood. So in turn and talk, what you do is give each student to work on a similar task, the same task independently. Then afterwards, ask these students to come together and compare and contrast their understanding. So what happens is that each student is first of all building their own understanding, then they add on the understanding of the other. This can also help in a student being able to explain their point of view and being confident with what they understand. I remember particularly when we think especially in terms of intercultural communication, I remember when I was doing for my undergraduate degree, I did ethics and development studies. And I remember at that time, one of the course units we're doing was culture. We had this professor, he was Professor Peter Kanyanda. He's really a person who really loves culture. And I remember he gave us an assignment to do in groups. And he put us in groups of different tribes. And he asked us to go ahead and find out the meanings and reasonings behind the namings in each of our cultures. And for myself, being a Mtora, I remember I was paired up with I think 2 or 3 people who were Baganda. And I remember that, at first you don't imagine, when you're young, you don't think much about your culture. But I remember when we went and did that, when I understood the reasonings behind the way let's say my grandfather gave me my name. And then later on to hear that for the culture of the Baganda, the way they name. And we got to understand one another. We may have different reasons, but for each one of us, there is a reasoning behind it. And for each one of us, you see one continuity in family, and then you see also being accepted and being taken on within a certain family setting. The cultural structures may be different, but the reasoning is the same behind it, and that gives similarity in platform. So for me, I remember when we actually had to turn and talk to one another in the groups so that we could understand why we were doing what we were doing. Groups. Now here, when we have group communication, what are some of the strategies that we would employ? One, make sure that you have a leader. Make sure that you have a leader in a group. And this leader has a specific task to make sure that everyone has a task and is focused on their task. Two, you have a reporter. This one keeps track of discussions. They used to call them the rapporteurs, the ones who take note of the discussions as they go along. Then the person who writes down the important points. So the reporter could be the same person as the writer, depending on how big your group is. Then you have the consensus builder, because in a group you have different viewpoints, and there are times when you can have certain people who overpower others. But we must make sure that we have a democratic consensus where a point where the person who ensures that we summarize and ensure that everybody's point of view has been brought in. Then you have the one who plays the part of the wild card, the person who comes in to support the leader. So it's important that these roles, particular roles, are taken up. The group may be small. You may find that a person may take up two roles in a group, but however, ensure that each role is taken up. Why? Specifically, when I think of an example, when I was teaching in my undergraduate class, I was teaching and I still do. I teach the IT groups. Now, I particularly used to teach programming. Now, when you're teaching programming, those really practical courses in IT, one of the things you take note of is that usually the boys, the male students, are usually very confident, and they're usually confident in their skills, and they really come and move forward. They're quite active. And sometimes you may find the girls can be shy. Now, when it comes to creating groups, you would be very wary when you'd find one boy in a group of girls. Why? Because normally that boy would take on and overpower the girls. And sometimes, because they were overly confident, you find they would really mislead, with people not realizing that if whatever member of group you are, no matter whether you may not be very skilled at a practical thing, you have a contribution to make. Every task, sometimes people assume that it needs only a certain specific task to do something. No, every task, anybody can make a contribution, and that contribution can add quite a bit. I remember particularly when I was in class, when I was doing my master's, and we were given those tasks for programming. And I remember I teamed up with 3 Chinese students, and there was myself and 1 student from Tanzania. So I remember when we started, we were particularly conscious of the Chinese students. We felt that they were a bit superior to us in programming, which they were. But however, they were not good at, for example, the English language. So when the task was given to us, they were a bit behind in interpreting what the task was meant, because the task was written in English. That was 1. 2, they were particularly not good at design. So I remember myself and my Tanzanian colleague, we took up the task of interpreting the task from English, then putting it into the design format. And then the 3 students who were good at programming then translated it into a program. That was real teamwork. And I remember for our group, we really scored well. We got 75% as a group. But that was because each one of us came in and did our part. So in the group, it is important that you have all these, you have these different posts filled up to ensure that everyone has a chance to give a contribution. Everyone is allowed to give a contribution. Any question before we move to some strategies for group work? Some more discussions? Any question?
My side, doctor, no.
Okay.
I don't know what.
Is everyone okay?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, we have here another strategy called Jigsaw. So Jigsaw particularly supports communication when you have a large group, or you have a task which has a large amount of information, and this may not be this task may not be handled if the entire task is given to an individual or is given to one group in particular. Now, when you have something as large as this, or a large task, you can use the Jigsaw strategy. So what happens in this strategy is that the teacher gets the task and splits it into several portions, and then gives it to each group member. You may give it to each group member, or if it is really large, you can decide that if your class is separated into groups, each group is given a section. Then later on, each group member or each group brings the section they have been working on and puts it together. So in this sense, that large amount of information is then split, is kind of broken down into manageable pieces that each group member can work on, or a different group can work on. And in that sense, you get more and more people to work together. And once they bring the pieces together, they can harmonize on areas that may have been missed out by other group members. So in this task, the teacher has to check each group that is working. You keep checking on them to ensure that each group has actually done what they are supposed to do. Now, I think one of the ways, one of the things, one of the technologies I'll show you that really supports this kind of teaching and this kind of communication is, for example, Zoom. Zoom has this, should I say, a feature that allows breakaway rooms where you can go into separate rooms and discuss different topics that may have been given to you by a teacher. Hold on a second, please. Sorry about. Sorry, apologies once again. My little niece was crying for her mother. So now, at the end, now once these groups have been split and then they are given different information, and the teacher has assigned the different group members, the students then get their materials and may pair up with a person with the same assignment. The students read the assignment and agree on points to share. So then afterwards, the teacher keeps checking on each group. So afterwards, the individual members then share their information with their teammates, and the teacher then sorry, let me move this. The teacher then checks that each group understands what the information that they present. Now, we've done this before with Zoom. Zoom has the capacity to break people into rooms. Now, once these students are broken into rooms, they have their different points to discuss. And the facilitator can move into each room to check on what they're discussing. Then later on, once they're done with their discussion, they come into the breakaway rooms are broken up, and then people then present their points together. The different groups then present their points. You can use this even with other technologies. There are so many other platforms that can support this style of discussion, the jigsaw style of discussion. A second strategy is gallery tour. So now, in this particular, what happens here is let's say you have your big class, and then you assign to each student a number. You can even tell each student count from one point of the class to the next point. You ask that each student counts out numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then all the ones are put into one group, all the twos into another, and so on and so forth. Now, what happens then is that in the new groups, the students will create a project based on the teacher's instruction. The teacher will then call a time, and all students will return. Now, the groups, each group will then return to their home group, where originally they counted themselves to 4, 1 to 4. They return to their home group, and then they discuss what was discussed in, let's say, in the ones, in the twos. Each group will discuss what was discussed. And now at the end of the day, you find that each group has actually, not only each separate group that discussed the task that was given by the teacher has actually then communicated to the other group members. And you find that in each group, you've actually exchanged, each member of the classroom has understood the content that has been discussed by each group. Now, in this case, you have a situation where students have understood, first of all, you've understood from your perspective, from the perspective of your original group, and from the perspective of each other group that has had the discussion. So in this case, when you look at it, you have, should I say, each student, now every member, every student in your class has actually understood the point of view of every other member of the class. And this should I say, even it eases up the work of the lecturer themselves or the teacher themselves. Now, when we look at the next strategy, inside-outside circle, this also forms the same kind of ideology as the gallery tour. The only difference is that it would work for a smaller group. It should essentially be more effective for small groups of classrooms. So what happens here is that you'd have two circles and which have an equal number of people, both inside and outside that circle. So questions are given to either the inner circle or the outer circle. The students who have the questions ask that question to the inner circle. After each question is answered, after each question, one circle rotates and repeats the process. So this one would work for smaller groups, where once one cycle is complete, it's given to another set. You give it to another. Should I say the circle that didn't initiate? What do we mean by this? So let us say you have you give a question to the outer circle. You ask them, let us say, a question on let us say let us think of something controversial, something that we discussed in my class previously, which was female genital mutilation, which is female circumcision. You put that question, that is the primary question, and the outer circle asks the inner circle to discuss that particular question. Now, the inner circle begins to build an argument about this particular discussion point, either for or against, and they critique it and so on and so forth. Now, once they complete that process and give their answer, the role is now reversed, where the inner circle then asks that question of the outer circle. So the outer circle then also goes ahead to build arguments for that particular question. Now you realize, but at the end of the day, each group has educated the other group, has brought in a point of view that the other didn't have previously. But again, just to note, this particular strategy is good when you have a small class size, which can allow for both the inner and outer circle. The gallery tour is especially good when you have a large class number, because that one allows you to create smaller groups, which then allows for complete discussion and participation of every single member. Then you have the placemat. Yeah, so the placemat looks particularly like, or rather you use a tool just as what we see in the image here. Let me just move my control panel here. So when you look at this image here, you have a piece of paper which has been divided into 4 sections. Yeah. This image that we see right here with the different quarters drawn up. So ideally this would work if you have again a relatively small class which you can divide up into these 4 sections. You place students in groups and give each of them a topic or a theme. The students work independently and on each section on their different themes. The students take time to discuss what they've written, and anything that is repeated or deemed important is then written in the circle here. Then the students present the main ideas they have written within the circle to the rest of the class. So the thing that each group, you notice here, has a different theme. If you look at this image, it has a different theme. What is similar is then placed in the circle, but each group is then given an opportunity to present their main points, including what is in the main circle. So that is the placemat. Then you have graffiti. Before we go further, do we have any questions? Because I've presented quite a number of them before we go to graffiti. Do we have any question?
Hello, doctor.
Yes, please.
Hello.
Yes, please, I can hear you.
Yes, the others have so far. I needed more explanation about the placemat.
The placemat.
Sorry for taking.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay. So, like we said, if we look at the image here, yes, look at the image here. Now, I'll just give you an example. I know some of you have done something, let's say, on research methods. Yes, or you must have done something on research methods, not so?
Yes, doctor, we have done so.
Yeah. Now imagine you picked out 4 research types, and you ask your students that these are then now your themes. Let's say, let us focus on research types. Let's say empirical research, analytical research, descriptive, and what else? And conceptual research, those 4. These are 4 themes. And you ask each one of them, you ask the different groups to give a description or a definition of these types of research with examples and where they could, where you would find typically these types of research. And each of these students then come in and give their points, their viewpoints on that topic. Now, here, imagine that you haven't taught them these types of research. You ask them to go out there and research and find out. Now, as they discuss, as they each place on this placemat their findings on the different types of research, there are certain things which will come out that are common. Take an example. Anyone who is doing, who gives a description of empirical research, at a certain point, there are certain things that they will say that are quite similar in empirical research, or sorry, from empirical research that are similar in descriptive type of research. Certain things will overlap. Now, those things, as they discuss, as they place them here, the things that are similar will come into the central, in the center of the placemat. So that as they are discussing, they'll even find out, oh, there are certain things that they discovered about basic research that are actually in empirical research. Even some examples that are similar, they will place them there. So that as each group begins to present its work, let's assume this first section here focuses on empirical research. As that group begins to present their findings on what empirical research is, certain ideas of empirical research may overlap with certain things in descriptive research. Those things that have overlapped, they will place in the center. Now, what happens here is that each group is educating the other on their theme, their area which they've gone out and researched and they're now reporting back. But also each group is also learning that there are certain similarities as they go along the way. I'll give you an example. As each group is going out to research on their different types of research, certain words will come out like variables. Then all students will realize, oh, in all research, there's such a term as variables. Then they may find out that in each research, there were certain terms that certain themes came out, certain terminologies like for example, facts, empirical facts, or observable facts. These then fall in between. That even when you find somebody is doing basic research, variables will exist. Observable facts, those terms will exist, and those terms will come in the center here. And as they begin to do it, they begin to see certain areas which are the same and where they differentiate. You may find a variable in basic research may be handled differently from empirical research, or the source of a variable is quite different when it's coming from empirical research as opposed to basic research or conceptual research. So in that sense, when you have 4 different groups are looking at 4 different themes, and they will present these different themes accordingly. But at the same time, they will also see areas that overlap. Edwin, have I answered your question? Was it Edwin that had asked that question?
Yes, doctor. Thank you very much. I've got it now.
Okay. So let's move to graffiti.
Hello.
Hello, yes, please.
Hello, doctor.
Yes,
Yeah.
please, Edwin.
Yes, I was saying I've got it right now. I've got it
Yes.
well.
Okay. So let's move.
I was saying, doctor, thank you very much. Now I've got it well.
Yes, please. I heard you. I heard. Okay, let's move to graffiti. So again, graffiti takes on the image that you see there. When you look at that image, graffiti, basically, the term graffiti comes from a certain style of art form, which you normally find in, this is normally in the Western world and within certain communities, especially communities which have certain societies. For example, in the US, usually the poor communities, this is where you find what is referred to as graffiti art. Art which somebody draws on a wall, on a huge piece of wall, and it can look a bit disorganized, but sometimes it can have quite a lot of meaning as well attached to it. So, but in this particular case, in communication in a classroom, you would think of a poster, a huge piece of poster, and here you have different items placed on this poster. Either it's on on this particular poster, or you have a huge board and you may have people with different small notes where you have a different item placed on a different note or a different sheet.